Stepping out of the garden, Shivangi walked straight towards her room. Her steps were normal, but a storm of emotions was raging within her. The maidservants working along the way greeted her with smiles. Some bowed their heads in respect, while others looked at her with the usual curiosity about her well-being. But Shivangi was so deeply lost in her thoughts that she didn't pay attention to anyone. She just kept moving forward, as if the existence of the world around her had ceased. Everyone in the palace understood that something had happened that had upset the princess, because on normal days, she greeted everyone with a smile. But today, there was no sparkle in her eyes. There was no expression on her face, and that was what was causing the most concern. However, no one knew the real reason for her sadness. Some maidservants began to whisper among themselves, some soldiers exchanged glances, but no one had the courage to ask the princess anything. As soon as Shivangi reached her room, she gently closed the door. The moment the door closed, it was as if she had severed her connection with the world. She went straight to her bed and lay down without changing her clothes. She tightly shut her eyes, as if she didn't want to feel anything, as if she wanted to suppress the pain rising within her mind. But emotions never listened to anyone. Moments later, tears began to flow from the corners of her closed eyes, slowly, silently, without any sound. Shivangi couldn't understand why she was feeling so sad. After all, she had long ago stopped expecting anything. At least that's what she kept telling herself. But perhaps the truth was something else. The person whose attention she always wanted to draw, whose affection was her biggest dream, for whose one word of praise she could wait for hours, had never considered her important. This thought was repeatedly wounding her heart. All the events of her past life began to swirl before her eyes one by one. Every time she had tried to get closer to him, every time she had expressed a desire to spend some time with him, every time she had longed for his love. But in return, she had only received neglect, only distance, only silence. Recalling all this made her heart even heavier. Now the tears showed no sign of stopping. The room was silent. Only the sound of her broken breaths could be heard. Shivangi didn't even know how long she lay there on the bed, crying. Time seemed to have stopped, and then, exhausted, crying, she fell asleep. When she woke up, the sun had already set. The sky had turned a deep blue. A soft moonlight spread through the window in the room. There was a strange calm all around. For a few moments, Shivangi couldn't understand where she was. But as soon as she remembered why she had been crying, tears filled her eyes again. But this time, these tears were not of pain. They were tears of anger. Anger at herself. Anger at her hopes. Anger at her weakness. She grabbed her hair and pulled hard, as if punishing herself. Then she whispered to herself, "Who are you hoping for, Shivangi? Someone who doesn't care about you. Someone who doesn't even need you." Her voice trembled, but it held more bitter truth than pain. A moment later, she spoke again. Very soon, their beloved daughter will be back with them. And then they will completely forget you. So why are you shedding tears for that person, who doesn't care whether you exist or not? Silence fell in the room again. And in that silence, a new emotion began to rise in Shivangi's eyes. The pain was slowly transforming into resolve. A new beginning, or a new plan. Shivangi sat in silence for a while. Then she took a deep breath and rang the small bell kept by her bed. Hearing the sound of the bell, the maidservants standing outside immediately came in. They greeted her respectfully. Shivangi said without showing any emotion, "Prepare for a bath." The maidservants bowed their heads in response. In just a few moments, the entire bathing area was ready. A little while later, Shivangi came out after bathing. The warm water had eased some of the fatigue from her body, but the burden on her mind was still the same. Other maidservants began to prepare her. They laid out some beautiful jewelry in front of her. But this time, Shivangi refused to wear any special jewelry. She simply put on a plain outfit. No crown, no heavy ornaments, no decorations. As if she wanted to be just Shivangi today, not a princess. By then, it was time for dinner. One maidservant politely asked, "Princess, will you not go to the court for dinner?" Shivangi replied without looking at her, "No, bring the food to our room." Her tone was cold, so cold that the maidservant didn't dare to ask anything further. She quietly bowed her head and left. A little while later, a maidservant returned with a trolley. It was laden with various dishes. She respectfully served the food. But Shivangi ate the food almost without tasting it. She didn't even remember what she had eaten. The maidservant stood there until Shivangi finished her meal. Then she picked up the dirty dishes and quietly left the room. That night, when Shivangi was trying to sleep, she couldn't. She kept tossing and turning, sometimes to the right, sometimes to the left. But her mind was restless. The more she tried to sleep, the more her mind got entangled in old thoughts. After a while, when she realized that falling asleep was impossible, she got up and started to walk slowly around the room. But that didn't make any difference either. Finally, she stepped out of her room. The palace was enveloped in silence. Most people had fallen asleep. When she looked around, there was no one there. Upon going downstairs, she saw some soldiers on guard. They bowed their heads upon seeing the princess, but Shivangi just glanced at them, and without disturbing anyone, she headed towards the garden. In no time, she reached her mother's tomb. She said nothing, just sat there quietly, and looked up at the sky. The stars were twinkling in the moonlit night, as if recounting an old tale, as if the memories of the past years were written in the sky. A vow, which is now her life. Looking up at the sky, numerous thoughts began to surge in Shivangi's mind. We have to go far away from here. We have to become very powerful. We have to take revenge for our death, and for our mother's murderers. Her hands unconsciously turned into fists. A determined spark shone in her eyes. For this, we need to become even stronger, and we will. Her voice was soft, but her resolve was unwavering. This was not a wish. This was her goal. It was her life. Thinking this, she slowly rested her head on the tomb, as if seeking solace in her mother's lap, as if wanting to leave behind the pain that had been suppressed for years. Before she knew it, her eyes grew heavy. And then, she fell into a deep sleep right there by the tomb. They say no matter how troubled a person is, as soon as they rest their head in their mother's lap, all troubles vanish. Perhaps this was true for Shivangi as well. But there was someone else, too, who was watching her every move from a distance, the king. And for the first time, a father's concern was clearly visible in his eyes. To know more, read the next chapter.